Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the 1st of May, and it's Wednesday night, so that means this is another Yankee Air Museum historic presentation night. How many first-timers do we have here?
Hey!
Wow, cool. How many are here because of Barry's talk? How many are here because I'm Jeff Bush and I'm the MC? Lori, you're not raising your hand.
I can hear this any day.
Any time of the day or night. Well, hey, it's warming up. The air show season is just around the corner. Maintenance is almost complete on our flyable aircraft. And we look forward to another great season. Of course, a big air show, Thunder over Michigan, will be July 20th and 21st this year. Other events coming up include Open Cockpit Days on May 19th and again on August 25th. That's always a popular event. We open cockpits on the airplanes. You get to stick your head inside and see what they're like. Wings and Wheels is going to be on June 22nd at the RAC, the Roush Aeronautics Center. Plus historic presentation night every month and more. As always, please check the website, www.yankeeairmuseum.org, and watch for updates and upcoming events. And now I would like to ask that you turn off all your cell phones, or at least put them on silence or stun, and hold your questions for the end of the program. Tonight's speaker is no stranger to many of us. This is his 6th presentation at Yankee. Barry is a docent at the museum, an author, a historian, and probably more, in addition to being a really great guy. Maybe later.
I didn't pay him to say that.
Tonight he's going to talk to us about the more than 80-year history of this airport that has become a part of life for so many of us. From aircraft and automobile manufacturing to air transportation of passengers and freight and more, Barry brings a unique blend of information. Join me now in welcoming Mr. Barry Levine.
All right, well, thanks everybody. Good with the sound?
Yep. Yes.
All right. As Jeff indicated, my name is Barry Levine, and tonight's presentation is an overview of Willow Run's incredible history. The full story would be a college course. It would be here forever, so we're not going to do that. I'm confident each of you have been touched by Willow Run. Of course, many of you have worked here in one capacity or another or volunteer here at the museum. I'd like to thank the museum, Becca Folsom for helping to organize, and Jeff Bush for MC duties. Much appreciated. A little bit of background about myself. My dad was in the Army Air Force in World War II, and they worked for local car dealers back home in Connecticut, so I always have had an affinity for airplanes and cars, so here I am. I didn't appreciate Willow Run's history until I began volunteering here in 2015. We've had 2 books published, both touching on Willow Run. One's a history of the Yankee Air Museum and Michigan Aviation, People and Places That Changed History. They are on sale tonight at the gift shop or at Amazon. Thinking about a 3rd book project once I've retired from the Henry Ford Museum, but who knows, it's a lot of work. Thanks are owed to many. This is just a small smattering of the organizations and people that have helped me out enormously in writing and docent backgrounds. Of course, there's many contributions from people not listed, like all the docents, all the visitors that come through here, the staff at Yankee Air Museum. A disclaimer, recapping history is never a straight line process. There's often varying interpretations of what happened, when it happened, who did what. All I can tell you is I sorted it out as best I could. We'll see what you think. I'm looking at about 150 fact checkers here, so if I get something wrong, I expect I will hear about it. In many ways, Willow Run is a microcosm of the U.S. aviation and auto industries, plus some great human interest stories. This is Willow Run itself. I took this picture a few years ago, I think during the COVID period. It doesn't look like anything special. Over 80 years, though, it has held aviation, auto, transmission manufacturing, military research, an airport with air freight and passenger airlines, an aviation history museum that you're sitting in right now, a research center for new automotive technologies. Companies have come and gone, Willow Run remains. The site had originally been farmland. In 1931, Henry Ford bought over 1,400 agricultural acres on what was known at the time as Quirk Farms. Ford developed Camp Willow Run for boys whose dads were killed or injured during World War I, and these kids worked the field and learned learn job skills that would be helpful later in their lives. Overseas, however, trouble was looming. The late 30s and early 40s, Germany and Japan were aggressively rearming. Political and military leadership knew we needed to ramp up military production quickly. At the start of World War II, the U.S. had the world's 19th largest military, so we were in a very deep hole. Aviation became front and center. President Roosevelt in the 1940 fireside chat said, "Government must harness the efficient machinery of America's manufacturers to produce 50,000 combat aircraft a year." At the time, the entire fleet of the U.S. Army Air Force and Navy Air Service, 3,000 warplanes, and most of those were obsolete. Here at home, Henry Ford was not interested in a munitions plant. He gave in once he realized the government might have nationalized Ford properties. One weapon was the B-24 Liberator, a four-engine heavy bomber designed by Consolidated Aircraft in San Diego. In January of '41, Edsel Ford, Henry Ford II, Charles Sorensen, who was Ford's chief engineer, arrived at Consolidated for a look. Sorensen quickly got to the conclusion that Consolidated's operations were totally unsuitable for the mass production of aircraft. Sketched out overnight in his hotel room, the plant's layout as really a master's PhD thesis on mass production. It would feature standardized interchangeable parts, machined to precise tolerances, continuous workflow with assembly stations where workers and machines perform repetitive tasks. The architect was Alfred Kahn, who you see on the left. This was the last structure he designed before his death in 1942. And that's Sorensen on the right. They broke ground in late March, early April 1941. This was not a repurposed auto plant. It was soybeans, apple orchards, whatever they had here, but there was no standing factory at the time. Parts production began by late '41, and the first B-24, which was a teaching tool, came down the line in May 1942. At the time, this was the largest factory in the world under one roof at about 3.5 million square feet. Ford managed the plant on behalf of the government, and you can imagine, less than a year, you're having production coming down the line. Try building something at 3.5 million square feet today, in today's regulatory environment, you could not do it. Success was not preordained. In the early days, the plant was known as Willow Run, as in, will the airplane run? There was such poor quality. When they compare cars and aircraft of the era, though, we consider, autos might have had 15,000 parts and weighed something like 3,000 pounds. B-24 had 450,000 parts, easily 360,000 rivets, all of which were installed by human beings, 0 installed by robots. And those rivets were in 550 different sizes. The aircraft weighed 18 tons. The U.S. military, the Army Air Force, was part of the problem. They had 575 significant change orders to production in the first year of production. And those change requests might require new tooling, new equipment, redrawn blueprints, added training, resequencing production, a huge amount of rework. And to top it off, there's very little aviation expertise here in Metro Detroit. Ford had built 199 tri-motors 10 years earlier. Those aircraft were tinker toy compared to a B-24 in terms of complexity. The plant was enormous. Just as one example, many materials were delivered by the New York Central Rail Spur. B-24 engines were made by Buick in Illinois. Don't forget, in February 1942, the government shut down domestic auto production throughout the United States. So Ford, GM, Chrysler, all the suppliers contributed mightily to the war effort. And Buick's contribution, among others, I'm sure, was B-24 engines. Buick's president at the time was a guy named Carlo Curtis. He moved heaven and earth to convert a Buick plant in Melrose, Illinois to engine production. Melrose then went on to build 70,000 B-24 engines, many of which were on those trains to Willow Run, and I think it's a great spot they put together. Curtis went on to become General Motors president in 1953. There were 4 cranes that weighed 30,000 pounds each, used to unload the train cars when they came in. The plant was deafening. Hydraulic presses stamped out airplane parts, so picture working in a place where it sounds like a car hitting a tree over and over and over again. Riveting was extremely loud, all air hose powered, so if you had a headache when you came in, it wasn't any better at the end of your shift. There was 2 9-hour shifts daily. The plant was not air conditioned, so you're on your feet. That type of shift and that type of heat and humidity, picture a July day with here in Belleville, it's laying 95 degrees and humid, it's miserable. It's long before OSHA. Ford built the Airplane Apprentice School to teach workers about high-precision aeronautical manufacturing. Housing was a real problem. Ypsilanti and surrounding communities here were small towns before the war. There was a huge influx of workers that made housing a real challenge. You had people sleeping in chicken coops, trailers, cars. Willow Run Village was built. There's no privacy, little room, minimal amenities. Be assured you would not want to live there. The Detroit Industrial Freeway was built to help get people to work, as well as transporting components from the Rouge and Dearborn. That was built with the support of Ford Motor, the state of Michigan, and the federal government. First triple overpass, which was built to get people to and from the plant. This was approximately a Michigan Avenue and E course. Sorry to say it no longer exists. And those were people lined up to look at it because it was kind of a historic piece of road architecture. Over 100,000 people came through Willow Run at one time or another during the war, 10,000 of whom quit during the first week. So that gives you an idea. And why would you work here? If you lived in Detroit, there were a million plants. You could walk there, you could take the bus, you could take the trolley. There's gas rationing, tire rationing, so this was not an easy deal. There was a contentious union relationship. There were 33 wildcat strikes alone in 1943. UAW-CIO Local 50 was the bomber local. Many societal mores about women not working in manufacturing fell aside. About 40% of the workforce in total was female. Unprecedented to have women working in heavy manufacturing, just didn't happen. Rosie the Riveter emerged, with women supporting the war effort in a wide range of roles. Help wanted ads at the time noted equal pay for equal work, starting at 85 cents an hour, which wasn't a bad wage coming out of the Depression. Fact was, women typically had lower job classifications, so effectively their pay was less, even though it was billed as being equal pay for equal work. Women did everything, not just riveting. They operated equipment, they did moved the cranes, welding, inspections, as well as riveting. In the early days, the plant had signs saying, "Gentlemen, watch your language." There were women present. After a few weeks of the women being on site, additional signs went up and said, "Women, watch your language." There are gentlemen here. This is the most famous Rosie of them all. Sorry to say she did not work here at Willow Run. She was at an electronics plant out in California. Her name was Norma Jean Doherty. After the war, she and Doherty split up. They got divorced. They got divorced. She dyed her hair platinum blonde, took up a career in acting, and changed her name to Marilyn Monroe. Now, if she worked here, that would have been something, but not today. African Americans at Willow Run had additional challenges from racism of the day. There was lots of tensions between blacks and white in the workforce. This was not resolved during World War II. During the war, Ford met with some of its white female Willow Run employees, some of whom would absolutely refuse to work with the black women. The UAW went to bat for these women. There was government pressure. The motor company management put some pressure on, and that led to a partial breakdown of some of the barriers. There was a Ms. Anderson, I could not find her first name, was one of the first black women hired here at the end of 1942. She trained as an inspector out of Cass Tech High in Detroit, applied to Willow Run for a job 5 times, took the bus out from Detroit to here, back and forth, and it was miserable bus rides, not air conditioned. It's multiple stops. They finally hired her. By April of '43, there were about 290 black female employees out of 15,000 women employed, so a drop in progress. Long line of dignitaries visited. President Roosevelt came through here in September '42. Rode through the plant here with Henry Ford. You can see them both in the limousine. Now, you always stay away from politics here at Willow Run and the Yankee Air Museum. Obviously, it's a contentious time, but it would be fair to say, as a matter of historic accuracy, Franklin Roosevelt and Henry Ford despised each other. It's Charles Sorensen in the front seat, and he later commented, it was one of the worst days he had ever spent with Henry Ford. Harry Truman came through here when he was a senator. You know, the 1942 and 1943 inspections of the plant. A lot of concerns about waste and inefficiency because in the early Willow Run days, the government was spending a ton of money, no airplanes. Where were the aircraft? Ford went to work on committee findings. More housing and training was needed. A lot of production of components was outsourced given the endless issues getting and keeping people. Special note, Henry Ford's son Edsel was pivotal in getting the plant moving forward. He was president of Ford Motor during the war. He passed away in 1943 from what was generally thought to be cancer, although I've read some sources say it was some stomach, digestive system issue that was really not understood in 1943. I retired from Ford Motor in 2019. We would have had a different history of the company had Edsel lived, and was the president of the company instead of the Deuce. What, better or worse, I don't know, it would have been different. By 1944, the learning curve was mastered. The change control process was better managed. Training had improved, more housing was available, and you had a bomber an hour coming off the line, so a long, long way from Willow Run. The plant received an Army-Navy Excellence Award for the quality of their work. For a bit of relaxation, the tap room opened up in Ipsy in 1941. Photo shows the original door on the right and signage of the era. I'm not quite sure if that was the original sign or just a replica of a period piece. See how low the door handle is? It's designed for the little people that worked at Willow Run who might want to come out just like anybody else for a beer or a scotch after a hard day on the line. The little people were hired as they had easier access in the B-24 center wing for riveting and similar work. By war's end, the plant turned out 8,600 B-24s at Willow Run of various models, more than any of the other Ford plants in the U.S., and there were only U.S. plants that made B-24s. 1,900 of these things were kit-built and shipped to Oklahoma and Texas, plants for final assembly on specially designed trucks. B-24s were a key part of the Allied arsenal, all theaters of the war. Historian Stephen Ambrose wrote, "The B-24 didn't win the war on its own, but you can't imagine winning the war without it." Shown here in this artwork, attacking the oil fields at Ploiești, Romania, a low-level attack known as Black Sunday for the heavy casualties suffered. So World War II comes to an end. Workers largely get laid off because the Army Air Force canceled the contract with B-24s obsolete. Assets to the state for Henry Kaiser and Joseph Frazer, both of whom were industry titans. Kaiser built Liberty ships on a mass production basis, which sent troops and war materials all over the world. Built the, what's the dam outside of Vegas, Hoover Dam? Whatever, yeah. He was construction bandit, founded what became Kaiser Permanente healthcare insurance, real one of the great American industrialists of the 20th century. Frazer on the right was a force for years in Detroit's auto industry at Chrysler, Willis Overland, and Graham Page. Kaiser Frazer worked hard to convert an empty shell of a plant, because Ford cleaned everything out, to auto production. For the first day of occupancy, they had one working telephone line. Production began in June of '46. This is car number one, Kaiser Frazer number one, being sold to a Los Angeles dealer. See one guy driving the car and the other guy pointing. Must have been awfully lonely. Two guys, one great big plant. Henry Kaiser told the employees in 1947 they would have plants all over the country, but it's not to be. It did build over 700,000 cars from 1946 to 1954 with 4 lines of tracks for production. It has some very innovative car designs. This is a Darren. The designer was a guy named Howard Darren. It was fiberglass, 2-seat sports car with sliding doors. This at about the same time as the Corvette, which had very weak sales at first. So if Kaiser Frazer did better, and these things sold, you would have a rewrite of American auto history. That said, however, they could not compete with Ford, GM, or Chrysler. For all their wealth, they were simply undercapitalized. Kaiser just simply didn't grasp the scale of starting up an auto company, relocated operations to Toledo, and they went to Argentina, ultimately disappeared as an independent car company. In addition, Kaiser Frazer manufactured C-119 flying boxcar aircraft under a license from Fairchild. I think that I've seen the most commonly agreed upon number is 71. Some of these C-119s, which were designed to be freight haulers, were converted into gunships in Vietnam with a distinguished combat record. And a Kaiser Frazer AC-119 crashed on engine failure with takeoff from Tanzania in 1970. 6 of 8 of the airmen on board died in the crash. I met one of the 2 survivors last fall. Unbelievable. And he wrote a book. His name's Alan Chandler, and so you can get it off Amazon. Well worth reading Alan's account of what happened. Anyhow, for reasons lost to history, there's various suspicions about whether Kaiser Frazer screwed up or Fairchild just wanted to get rid of him. The Air Force canceled the Kaiser Frazer C-119 contract, and now there's 1.5 million square feet of idle plant space at Willow Run, which came in handy just a few weeks later, because the GM's Livonia transmission plant on Plymouth Road burned to the ground in August 1953. An absolute huge crisis for General Motors. Livonia was the sole source of hydromatic transmissions, produced 4,000 a day and used extensively not only within General Motors, but with other manufacturers. So right off the bat, GM furloughs 26,000 employees. Thousands more in reduced hours, and they cut new car production by 100,000 units. So clearly a major crisis. GM leased its space from Kaiser Frazer 8 days after the fire, then built the entire facility. Bought it for $26 million in November 1953, so the bureaucracy must have been working on overdrive. Your reconfiguration work was enormous. 40 engineers worked 12 hours a day, 7 days a week to redesign the factory for transmission production, for car production. Purchasing personnel went all over the world, US, UK, wherever, buying parts and equipment. Over 3,000 machines had been destroyed or damaged, so they had to be replaced, rebuilt, something. Some thought it would take a year to get back into production. In fact, they had transmissions coming down the line within 12 weeks. Plant manager was a fellow named Ed Kagi, credited General Motors management and outside workers and their own internal workers for their contributions. And here's a picture of the assembly line. 12 weeks from absolutely nothing, and it was, they did it. So what did Hydromatic do? Well, by the time they closed down, they built 82 million transmissions. It has to be a record for single transmission plant production anywhere, anytime. Plant expanded about 5 million square feet. Employees used to use bikes and scooters to get around. It was just physically too big to walk it. Couldn't do it. Plant closure was announced in 2009 in connection with General Motors bankruptcy. Last transmission comes off the line in 2010. The peak employment had been about 14,000, but of course, leading up to this, there was mechanization and layoffs. So about 1,400 people lost their jobs. This in the middle of a terrible recession in 08 and 09. Steep fall in property values, so these people had some very unappealing options to look at. At the human level, there's one family with 3 outcomes, all of whom worked at the plant. Former UAW local president was a guy named Don Skidmore. So after the plant closes, he commutes for a while to Toledo. He gets sick of that because he lives somewhere up here in Ipsy. Takes a buyout and he ends up doing maintenance work at a golf course. This is his wife, Dawn Green. She had worked at the plant, took her severance money, went back to school, became a nurse, so she came out all right. She and Skidmore divorced though because you can imagine a ton of stress in the marriage, just too much, so they split up and they went their separate ways. Green had a stepson who started at the plant, and his vision apparently was 30 years and out. In the auto industry, it was very common. You would assume the pension and generous health care benefits for the rest of your life, so you put your 30 years in, and you punch out, and you're gone. That's over with. And as of a 2018 MLive article, the stepson was just up in the air with loose ends of what he was going to do with his life. Many similar stories of what happens when the future is doubtful. Some of these people ended up fine, did perfectly well, others not so much. Excuse me, cough really carries, doesn't it? Meanwhile, south of Hydromatic, but still Willow Run grounds, was Willow Run Assembly. As a current look at part of the structure, this building was known as the Fishbowl, and they used to have cars on display there back in the day when they were running production. It was originally built in '42. It was a storage building for B-24 parts. Kaiser Frazer used it for a while, and then GM bought it in about 1955, and they built school buses and trucks. In July '58, they broke ground to expand the facility for Chevy Corvair production. The Corvair was a unique vehicle with a rear-engine design, the trunk in the front, some sharp styling. Even though it had a fairly limited production run, hugely influential in auto history, given all the litigation and Ralph Nader. It's a presentation on its own about the Corvair. Got a boost from Ed Cole, who went on to become GM's president in the '60s. He was a real titan in the auto industry, and Cole was a driving force of the Corvair. His son told me he's been out to Willow Run, had been out to Willow Run many times during the construction of the plant just to keep an eye on Corvair, because Ed Cole was a hands-on manager. The plant ultimately became over 2 million square feet. Of course, cars didn't come off the line by magic. People were needed to build them. There were long lines to get hired. This was in the middle of the 1958-1959 recession. Some accounts had it as a 2-day waiting line just to apply for a job. The 59ers were people who started working on site in 1959. A lot of these guys were military veterans, some of whom were hired on the spot and began working right away. Married men with children were preferred as they were more likely to stick around. Here's the 59ers logo. The man on the right is Dominic Orlando. This is much after 1959. There's 1,000,001 backstories about the Corvairs, one of which was, first one comes down the line, you have all these GM big shots waiting for the big day, Ed Cole's pet car, they try and drive it off the line and the car doesn't start. Oh my good Lord. Dominic Orlando by trade was an electrician, so he rushed over to the car, diagnosed they had a couple wires crossed, uncrossed them, the car started, life could resume. 1960, the Corvair was named Car of the Year by Motor Trend, and this was the primary production plan was Willow Run assembly. Behind the scenes, it was a tough way to make a living. Starting pay in 1960 or so was about $2.19 an hour. The work was grueling. A few safety measures in place, as this was pre-OSHA, no masks in the paint booth, no exhaust vents for fumes. Ergonomics was not a huge consideration. 60 Corvairs came down the line per hour. Production rarely shut down unless there was a catastrophic event. Turnover was high. Some guys went out for lunch and they just never came back. So, Willow Run Assembly produced 1.4 million Corvairs here until production shut down in 1969. GM turned its attention and funding to the Camaro to compete with Ford's Mustang. Ralph Nader's book, Unsafe at Any Speed, included one chapter about Corvairs and rollovers, but Corvairs just couldn't shake the image. Nader's charges, by the way, were totally refuted by NHTSA, National Highway Transport Safety Administration, in 1972, but so what? They had stopped production. As I noted, it was a huge impact on automotive history, product litigation, and the inner workings of General Motors, which perhaps became too conservative. And some, just as a side note, I promise to stay away from politics, but I'll dabble for a second. Some think the Corvair helped make George Bush president in 2000, in that Nader was on the Florida ballot in 2000. He got 95,000 write-in votes. George Bush won the state over Al Gore by about 500 after he did all the recounts. Presumably, if Nader wasn't on the ballot, most of those people would have voted for Al Gore, making him president. Better or worse, I'll leave that to you to decide, but the Corvair had its indirect tire, if you will, on presidential history. Anyhow, the last Corvair is normally a collector's item, comes off the line in May '69. No one's quite sure what happened to it, where it is, if it still exists. From what I've read, it's long gone, but it's too bad. Anyhow, while Corvair production wound down, many changes were coming. October '68, the first women were added to the production workforce at Willow Run by GM, so Rosie's had taken a step back after World War II. If you were a female assembler, you had to be 5 foot tall and weigh at least 100 pounds. First, women were required to wear hairnets, but men with long hair had no such requirements. So women go to management and say, what's up with this? Seems like a bit of a double standard, don't you think? A couple weeks later, the edict comes out, if your hair is long, regardless of your gender, on goes the hairnet. After the Corvair, the plant made many GM vehicles, including the last year of the Pontiac GTO was 1974, and in the muscle car era. We built in the 80s GM X cars, such as this Buick Skylark here from this advertising piece. Sold well at first, but then the endless quality problems and a public fight with NHTSA about a brake recall. This was not General Motors at its best. The plant overall, and here's some examples, made 7 million cars. The peak was 1973, where we had 6,000 workers making 1,000 cars a day. The plant had been downsizing. Anywhere, depending on what source you read, anywhere from 2,600 to 4,000 people lost their jobs when it closed, so there's lots of upheaval again. Foreign competition, mechanization, costs, all of it. The plant paid millions of dollars annually in property taxes, so it's devastating news to the UAW Local 1776, the city and the community. The New York Times reported that in the weeks after the closing, 6 men, aged 39 to 49, died from either heart attacks or something called brain disorders, which sounded to me like code for suicides, from all the emotional stress and upheaval, because where are you going to go? I mean, Detroit was in a terrible economic shape, had this job well paid and well benefited, and now you've got 0 options, it seems like. This photo, was an unnamed couple hearing the plant was closing, and that life, as they knew it, was over. The photographer was a guy named Russ Marshall, did some great black and white photography of the auto industry. You can Google search it, and he's just a terrific photographer. All black and white, these auto industry shots are just great. Long story short, there was litigation between IPSI, Washtenaw County and General Motors for tax abatements that had been provided to GM in return for employment commitments. It was claimed GM didn't fulfill their terms of the deal. GM ended up prevailing, the plant closed in 1993. So, sad ending for both automotive plants given all that history. Meanwhile, with all the auto stuff going on, aviation remained very important here. Willow Run became Detroit's primary commercial airport in the 40s. It previously had been Detroit City Airport. First airline that flew in here was Capital Airlines in June 46. These two people are getting off the first flight landing here. They used Hangar 1 as the terminal. This map shows the layout of the airlines that used Willow Run. Of course, many of these airlines either bankrupt, merged out of existence, or disappeared one way or the other. Various bays were converted into the passenger terminal and handled baggage and maintenance. Terminal was often called the barn, which is appropriate given its bare bones nature after World War II. Enter Minoru Yamasaki. He's the architect pictured on the right. He was hired in the mid-50s to update the terminal. Later in his life, Yamasaki designed New York City's World Trade Center. This is the front of the terminal, obviously the 60s, even the Mustang in the bottom left there. You walked out to the aircraft, there were no covered jetways. The in-house hotel was in the terminal. Hotel rooms advertised rooms with radio and TV, soundproofing, and rates from $8 to $14 a night. The movie theater opened up here in 1948. Early days, they might have newsreels, Mickey Mouse cartoons, or assorted newsreels. One of the first, if not the first, airport car rental outlets was Avis here at Willow Run. Ultimately, however, civilian air traffic moved to what's now Metro Airport. Longer runways closer to downtown, and the last commercial flight left Willow Run was a United trip to Chicago, June of '66. One of the many distinguished passengers here was Senator John Kennedy in October 1960. Flies in as private charter aircraft Caroline, named after his daughter. Gave a talk at the Michigan Union, and that's what this photograph is from, on U of M's campus, and he foretold the creation of the Peace Corps, where he asked students what you could do to make the world a better place. Made a claim in the sports world. Tigers, of course, won the World Series in 1968. They were going to return home from St. Louis and land at Metro, but there was such a mob of people, the FAA said absolutely no way, because they were afraid all the fans would storm around the airfield, and you couldn't have it. They divert to Willow Run, and still about 1,000 people showed up here. As you can see, that grainy photo on the right, they're arriving. On the left is Al Kaline, who worked in the series, and you can see Tim McCarver. I don't know who the umpire is. Long, colorful history of air freight at Willow Run, which continues on to this day. All sorts of startups, mergers, and buyouts, a very twisted maze of companies. For years, auto companies had numerous auto assembly plants and suppliers throughout North America. Frequent flights were required to and from Willow Run, often on an emergency basis to keep production running. Losing production, especially of a hot-selling model, was to be avoided at all costs. So if you had to pay a premium rate for an air shipment, so what? You had to keep the assembly line going. As in 1997, there were 12 freight operators here. There was something of an aviation Wild West in the early days. There was a time when Willow Run never shut down, no matter how bad the weather was here. There's little job stability. You were at mercy of business operations and conditions. The auto industry was doing well, you had a job. If not, see you later. Layouts were not unknown. Pilots would sometimes sleep here in Willow Run buildings, and they carried beepers. You were expected to be right at the airport, ready to fly if within 25 minutes of being paged. There were shower facilities at the Willow Run firehouse, and the firemen said, hey, if you guys need a shower, come on by. All sorts of unique stories behind the air freight. One of my favorites is Zantop. Zantop Flying Service was formed to provide flight lessons in 1946 out in Jackson. The service began with four brothers, Dwayne, Lloyd, Howard, and Elroy Zantop. Family lore has it that these guys borrowed $1,500 from the family to start up operations. Sold out in 1966, and then in 1972 they resumed operations at Willow Run in 1970 as Zantop International Airlines. ZIA was once one of the world's largest cargo airlines. They might carry 1 million pounds of freight a night, and they flew out of Hangar 2, a World War II facility which no longer exists. The ops center, which you're looking at here, was in Hangar 1. They set up a hub and spoke system with Willow Run as the hub, just like FedEx has in Memphis and I'm sure many other cities. But problems emerged. Willow Run had short runways. limited freight handling space. Number of auto plants began shrinking, and of course increased imports reduced the need for Xantop, especially before the Japanese started building plants and the other foreign makers down the south. Competitors such as FedEx, UPS merged, and Xantop discontinued operations in 2005. One person commented he had his job at FedEx because of his Xantop experience, and he thought thousands of others had their entry into aviation because of their time here at Willow Run and Xantop. Another pioneer is a woman on the wing there. Her name is Barbara Barrett. She's recognized by the FAA as the first commercial airline pilot in aviation history. After a short time here with Xantop, she moved on to Eastern Airlines. There were some rumblings on the internet. I don't know how true this is. She went to Eastern for sure. Supposedly she married a captain down there. Supposedly she then gets pregnant, and then Eastern fired her for being pregnant. I don't know if that's true or not, but there's, as you can see on the internet, there's threads back and forth. But it's an interesting story, true or not. But she was a pioneer. She was the first. Down the road a piece, Coletta, of course, is still here. This is Conrad Coletta, enjoying his workday here under that hot rod. He's a member not only of the National Hot Rod Association Hall of Fame, he's also a member of the Michigan Aviation Hall of Fame. Coletta was born in 1938. He first flew a small Cessna with auto industry parts in 1967. After the 9/11 terrorist attacks, virtually all U.S. civilian aircraft were grounded by the FAA. One exception, the Coletta flight departed Los Angeles early morning on September 12th for the East Coast with 50,000 pounds of blood and platelets for relief for people injured during the terrorist attack. So in the news, they flew home people from Wuhan, China in 2020 that had coronavirus in a specially fitted passenger area to reduce disease spread, as you can see on the right. One such flight in 2020, in January of that year, brought home over 200 American citizens. Those that were ill were in a special containment unit, and the containment unit was developed when Ebola had broken out in Africa several years prior. USA Jet still in the premises, still operating from Willow Run. The company's founding was started by a guy named Robert Phelps, whose career began as a Metro airport mechanic in 1960 at about $2 an hour. Phelps opened Active Aero, which was the parent company to USA Jet, sold out in the 1990s and numerous reorganizations and changes in ownership since then. Phelps personally went into the classic car restoration business in Michigan, and I think he's based in Florida. I don't know how active he is now, but I saw a picture of him in one of the cars. Looked great. And both Coletta and USA Jet are integral parts of the international supply chain. Other less well-known aspects of Willow Run, such as military research. In 1946, the University of Michigan acquired the airport from the federal government for $1. The government asked, made as a requirement, they didn't ask, they told, for $1, we will use this as a facility for research. And the research included supersonic wind tunnel, high altitude research for rockets. Several different Willow Run structures were used. So the Packard hangar, which is still standing, is right down the road by the B-52, which housed an Air Force Reserve unit in the 50s and is now used by USA Jet. Hangar 2041 became the original Yankee Air Museum. And what I learned a couple summers ago, it was originally at one time it was a computer center. These big mainframes. I'm sure the cell phones you all have are infinitely more powerful than those mainframes, but that was state-of-the-art technology then. Another key player was Lee Kepke. In 1967, Kepke and 3 others flew around the world in his Lockheed Electra, departing Willow Run in honor of Amelia Earhart's flight. They ended up flying over Howland Island the day Earhart and navigator Fred Noonan were supposed to arrive there in July 1937. Kepke co-founded the Detroit Institute of Aeronautics with Norm Ellickson in 1968 at Willow Run, taught aviation mechanics to young people in the area. So thousands of aviation technicians got their start here at Willow Run thanks to Lee and Norm. Sold out to Maya College of Technology in 1990. I'm going to get some water here, excuse me. Glad I'm not wired to hardwired. Much approved. Sold out to Maya in 1990. He passed away in 2013, but a huge contributor to aviation at Willow Run. Aviation is never risk-free. There have been fatal accidents, of course, involving Willow Run flights. June 2007. Medical transplant flight took off from Milwaukee, for Willow Run. 2 crew and 4 medical personnel were on board. In Milwaukee, they harvested lungs from a deceased person for a transplant back here at U of M. Shortly after takeoff, a mechanical issue, a pilot error resulted in a fatal crash in Lake Michigan. All 6 died. Another lung donation was arranged for the transplant recipient. Years later, I met the widow of one of the doctors on board here at the museum. I'll tell you, that was a sobering moment, meeting this woman and what she dealt with. I had 3 little kids at the time, and they ended up all right, I guess, but you can imagine it's a living, breathing nightmare for years with that. Well, this photo is a memorial at U of M Hospital to those lost in the flight. So if you've ever been there, you probably walk by this. That's what it represents. Better outcome was in 2017. It was a U of M charter with a basketball team on board. Crashed on takeoff. Very high winds that day, plus a mechanical problem with the aircraft. Slid through a fence on a Tyler Road, which you see here. Pilots were lauded for their skills in avoiding a tragedy. No serious injuries reported, so a miracle, because there were over 100 people on board. It could have been a much worse outcome. Of course, we are here at the Yankee Air Museum. Founded in 1981, this is Dennis Norton, member number 1, and he was inducted in the Michigan Aviation Hall of Fame in 2018. Had many challenges. Survived a devastating fire in 2004 where we lost the original museum, probably about 150 yards northwest of here. Economic crash in 2009, and a COVID closure in 2020. We purchased the last 44,000 square feet of the bomber plant in 2013. Our future plan was to house the entire museum in this structure. It's not to be. Fundraising a challenge, huge renovation costs. We now use it for airplane storage. Its future is to be determined. We have added a 36,000 square foot hangar in 2022 to store flyable aircraft. And that's just down the road here. We are preserving, among other aircraft, the B-52 Stratofortress. It's a Vietnam vet with about approximately 600 missions in combat. Its last flight, and the only B-52 flight to ever land here at Willow Run, was in October of '83. Other major projects include an F-100 Super Sabre and a PB-4Y privateer, 4Y2 privateer. You see photos from that. All 3 represent countless hours of dedicated work by our volunteers. We purchased a B-17G in 1986 for $250,000. 9 members of the museum took out a second mortgage to guarantee the loan. 9 years of restoration work, resumed flying in July 1995, named the Yankee Lady. The man on the left is the late Norm Ellickson, who passed away in 2020. One of the most knowledgeable people in the world about B-17s. We've nominated him for induction into the Michigan Aviation Hall of Fame this year. I think we'll have good news, but we'll see when there's an official announcement. We have a Willow Run Tribute Rosies on hand, dedicated to honoring the legacy of Rosies during the war, both here at Willow Run and throughout the U.S., because of course Rosie the Riveter wasn't just here. Any woman working at a defense plant in the U.S., you're in. We participate in numerous talks, events, parades, and various commemorations. We have a Rosie the Riveter drill team marches in support of the museum and for the women who helped shape our nation. Our tribute Rosies are terrific goodwill ambassadors and are doing great work to keep the Rosie legacy alive. Also on the grounds here is the American Center for Mobility. Founded in 2017, with funding from various automotive companies that provide seed money, offers in their words, a test center and smart parking laboratory for new automotive technologies. Much of their test track is on the site of the Willow Run bomber plant, so from the technology of the 40s to technology of today. We'll say its future seems unclear. Car companies are putting so much money into electric cars and battery-powered, self-driving cars seems fallen out of favor. So what's left? There's a lot, but certainly not everything. Most of the World War II structures are gone. Air freight remains a big business. Total freight moves about 200 million pounds a year. Willow Run Assembly, sorry to say, is not a public facility. It's a Willow Run Business Center. We're still going strong here. Just one example, we provide hundreds of volunteers for our annual air show, Thunder over Michigan. ACM will play a part in many changes coming to the auto industry. What they will be, I don't know, but they'll be around. Wayne County Airport Authority has a master plan with plenty of new construction and infrastructure upgrades for the airport. Every time you drive in here, there's construction. They're working on the roads, they're working on the water system. So lots of changes coming. To me, at least, the people aspects of Willow Run aircraft and cars are the best part of the story. I suspect any one of you here tonight would have stories of your own to share. Here are two from me. We have on the floor an A4C Skyhawk. Its livery honors Navy Lieutenant Commander Paul Galani. Galani flew 97 missions in an A4 and was shot down and then held captive by the North for 6 years. He spoke, long story short, we got an airplane that's dolled up in his honor from a museum in Virginia that went out of business. He spoke here in 2017, essentially it's like it's his airplane, about how he kept his faith in those dark days in a North Vietnamese prison camp, which must have seemed like an eternity and there's no guarantee of ever getting home. He used to have a saying, there's no such thing as a bad day when you have a doorknob on the inside of your door. So I used to sometimes bellyache when I was at Ford in the office, bad day with a boss or a bad meeting, and I thought about Galani and said, I don't have it so bad. The woman, by the way, is his wife, Phyllis Galani. They were on a Newsweek cover when they were repatriated home in 1973. I'll tell you, Paul Galani is probably the most inspirational person I ever heard speak live, period. This is that story. On a different note, the man on the right is named Don Homuth. About the Corvair shown here in 1968, we built on Willow Run 85% of the Corvair production worldwide, so I'm going to take the liberty of assuming it's our car. I can't prove it, but I think it was. So he's in the Army, comes home on leave from 1968, and the day before he ships back to Vietnam, he goes to a local dealership in North Dakota where he lived, and he buys this Corvair. The salesman thought, you're out of your mind. He didn't say it, but he thought, you're out of your mind. You're going to get killed over there buying a car. Okay, so he goes back, heavy combat, finds the Corvair therapeutic when he gets home and driving, soul soothing. Life goes on. He sells the Corvair to his girlfriend. He marries a girlfriend. Things don't work out so good, they get divorced. He sells the car and then moves to Oregon. And in about 2013, he gets the itch. What happened to my Corvair? So back to North Dakota, the ad goes up on Craigslist. I've never used it, but apparently that's what I used, Craigslist, and 3 days later he gets a hit in the car. So he flies back out there, talks to the guy, buys his car, trailers it back to Oregon, 7 years worth of work. So it's time, money, aggravation, busted knuckles, you name it, and then the result is a beautiful car here. And somebody asked him and said, well, Don, is it worth all that effort? And he thinks about it for a second and he says, yep. For a couple hours when I was driving it for the first time, I was 24 years old again. That's a nice story. He's now sold it. He's getting up there in years. He just didn't want to fool around with it, but it ended up all right. So how do you put all this in context? Rosie and We Can Do It seems like a good metaphor for the army of people with a direct connection to Willow Run going back over 80 years. We've had good times here, lean times, triumph, tragedy. Entrepreneurs have come and gone. Some have made a fortune. Some have gone bust, and everywhere in between. Constants at Willow Run, dealing with societal issues, hard work, perseverance, the ability to change and adapt. So to me, it's really a microcosm of America right here at Willow Run. I've got a 3-minute YouTube. It was a WDIV Channel 4 story about Xantop from the 80s. Becca looks like she's going to cue it up here, and I'll be glad to take your questions. So let's see what the tape looks like. It's going to start out a little green, but then it'll be fine.
I gotta look at.
Use force. As you are just getting your day started, let me show you some hardworking people who are finishing their day. They're the workers who move air cargo at Willow Run Airport. I joined them for a mad dash to the finish line at 4:30 a.m. While most people enjoy the tail end of a good night's sleep, workers at Xantop Air Freight Service rush to beat a deadline. During a few frantic hours this morning, they will load and unload more than 1 million pounds of cargo. Do the forklift operators have something like this?
Yeah, all of our forklift operators have one, all the foremen have one, all the load masters have one, so they all know where every airplane is.
This plane is heading to Dallas. Workers at a Texas factory will use this rack of material to line the inside of cars. And that's just the beginning. This plane is sending supplies to roughly 200 customers. The shipment includes things like Bart Simpson t-shirts, carpeting, medical supplies, computers, and more. And all of those companies have to have those parts today.
I fill out the paperwork, make sure the plane's loaded correctly, weight and balance it, and make sure all the freight's on the plane.
The trick to the trade here is getting it up there and learning how to turn it in, because you really can't see what you're doing. It's all guesswork with the pilo forks.
We're in our central hub office room.
It reminded me of a strategy room at the Pentagon. This mission to coordinate cargo and customers in 42 cities.
Lieutenant's loading the truck.
Right here?
Yeah. Give this to Terry.
For an outsider like me, watching all those forklifts run around, it looks absolutely crazy.
It might look crazy, but there is a method to the madness.
And what about the madness of working these odd hours?
It's hard, but I got used to it. After a while, it's like any other shift.
In the winter, I'll go right home to bed and sleep till about 4 o'clock. And in the summer, I'll stay up all day and then not go to bed till 4 o'clock. Different hours, seasons.
How many cups of that stuff do you drink every shift?
About 5.
No kidding?
1:30 to 6:30 in the morning, about 5 cups.
I bet it's not decaf either.
No, it sure don't smell like it.
At dawn, the coffee pot is empty and the planes are full.
Here, A13 Alpha, can you accept runway 5 left or runway 9 left?
They got the job done so that later today, other people in other places will get their job done. At Willow Run, Roger Weber, Newsbeat. Wasn't that a pretty shot of that plane taking off?
Oh, it was beautiful.
Brian Love shot that while
he
swatting
did.
mosquitoes in the middle of the field. And by the way, if any of you have
All right, well, thanks for your time and attention. Like I said, this just scratched the surface. You can take any one of these components, the car plants, hydromatic, the air freight, the passengers, us here at Yankee, and you just go on all night. So I try to hit the high points. Hope I whetted your appetite. You're obviously be welcome guests here at the Yankee Air Museum anytime. So any questions, sir?
How many Ford B-24s still exist?
Question, I don't know, can you hear the question? I'll just repeat the question, which was, how many Ford B-24s still exist? There are none that are flyable anywhere in the world. We know of 4 that exist that are on the ground. One's at Barksdale Air Force Base in Louisiana, one's at an air museum in Canada, and 2 are in the United Kingdom. And one of the ones, I mentioned I worked for Ford Motor, Alex Trotman, back when he was chairman, he's in the UK, I think he's from Scotland, was a member of the Royal Air Force. He pulled some strings and he arranged for one of our Willow Run B-24s to be there in the UK, so thanks for nothing. It looked a lot better here, but not today.
Yankee getting any closer to obtaining a B-24 in any condition?
I don't know, the closest we're probably ever going to see is either the PB-4Y2 restoration, which is a B-24 derivative. The fuselage we have in the Rosie the River exhibit is partially a Willow Run built B-24. I think, in fact, I'll tell you, the one in Ottawa, we used to have a docent here for a short time. There was a pilot for Delta Airlines, or co-pilot or something. So he's up in Ottawa, he has a few hours, he goes to the museum, and it's sitting in a warehouse. It looks great, but it's like nobody sees it. And I think I'm right in saying the museum at one time approached those guys in Ottawa. What would it take? Cash? Swap airplanes? Nothing doing. And then you'd have to think about how do you transport it down here because it's not flying. So that'd be a big challenge, but to me, it doesn't seem terribly realistic that we'll have an intact B-24 here. Sorry to say. Sir?
When did the FAA move in here?
Move in?
When did the FAA, when did they come in?
To
Willow Run.
Assuming a long time ago. I mean, they must have been on site as long as the FAA's been around, I'm guessing. They've been at any commercial passenger airline association. One form or fashion, the government regulatory apparatus has been here, I think. Sir?
So the B-24 plant, turning out the volume of planes that turned out at the end of World War II, who was in charge of running the plant that achieved that record production?
There's a guy, I really don't know very much about him. His name is Meade Bricker. I think he became the plant manager in 1943. and it was a function of Bricker, and it was everybody. To me, the suppliers, management, the labor unions. One guy or gal is just not going to be able to do it on their own. And it's a collective effort by many, many people, lots of fits and starts, lots of things gone wrong. There was an excellent book. It was by a guy named A.J. Bain called The Arsenal of Democracy. He spoke here, I think, about 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't see him, and I'm sorry I didn't. But he wrote The Arsenal of Democracy. It reads like a novel, but it's a historic account of all the challenges Ford had in getting the plant built. And if you know anything about Ford Motor, you had all the history with Henry, Edsel, the original Edsel, Harry Bennett, and all of it. All that drama played out in B-24 production one way or the other. So it's a lot of people. Meade Bricker was the guy in charge from 43 on. So he must have done a hell of a job.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
Sir?
Did Charles Lindbergh have any role in laying out or setting up the plant at the beginning?
I don't know about laying. He wasn't an engineer, but he test flew. And of course, the question was about Charles Lindbergh. And of course, Charles Lindbergh, Franklin Roosevelt, was an obscenity because he hated Lindbergh and America First, and it's just, I mean, it's a whole drama. But everything about Lindbergh, to me, at least partially rehabilitated his reputation as work here and during the war. Test flew B-24s, he had comments about the manufacturing. In the early days, in Bain's book, there's a report just blistering the poor quality of the planes. So I think Ford took it to heart, and they worked to make it better. Lindbergh, by the way, as a civilian, because I think Roosevelt took away his commission in the Army Air Force, shot down at least one Japanese airplane in the Pacific, flying combat, which he had absolutely no business doing, at least one. But he did it, so whether you love him or hate him, he certainly had a role here at Willow Run. Sir?
Oh, that PVY or something.
PV4Y2.
4Y2 variant. What is that variant? B24 is that?
It is a like next generation Liberator. The question is, what is a PD4Y2 compared to a Liberator? It's expanded, it's longer. The military use it for Cold War research, espionage over Soviet Union. Just as an example, one was shot down by the Russians in 1950 over the Baltic Sea. And for years, there was stories and rumors that some of the airmen had been captured and held until they died somewhere in Siberia. And they were used, I think we used them off of Korea on patrol work. So they're not as famous as the Liberators, but they had their own very unique history. Anti-submarine warfare, all sorts of stuff. And a restoration team, I wish we had it on display because those guys are doing, as are all the restoration teams, doing a great job. Yes, ma'am?
I heard not too long ago, there was I don't know if it was on the net, but there's going to be a 24 coming into Saginaw that you could either climb on or get a ride.
There's two flying to my knowledge, there's two flying B-24s in the U.S. One's down in Dallas, in Texas, with the Commemorative Air Force. One's up in Boston, the Collins Foundation. So if you saw it, I'm assuming one of those two is going to be here, but I'm not sure which one. And we've had them both here at different times at our Thunder Over Michigan Air Show.
A couple years ago, I got on it when it was up in Saginaw. I think they're going to have it back.
Good.
In case anybody wants to go see it.
I think it's under repair right now.
Oh, okay.
Any Megs invited to Thunder this year?
I doubt it. It's well, read the big. The NTSB hasn't released its formal report yet, to my knowledge, so we'll see. But just grateful nobody got killed. It's been a lot worse. Yes, sir.
What was the issue with the plant where instead of going out straight, they had to take a right turn or something?
Well, you could ask 10 people, and there's going to be 10 versions of reality. It's generally known as the tax turn. Plants that's right on the border of Washington and Wayne County. Some versions of it, and some of our docents have challenged it, but it's a good legend. So I'll leave it at that. How factually accurate it is, I'll leave to you. As I mentioned, Roosevelt and Ford hated each other. Washington County back in the day was Republican and lower taxes, and Wayne County, which was Democrat and higher taxes. And there was some talk about expanding the plant 600 feet into Wayne County, and the Ford people essentially said, don't even think about it. So they put in a 90-degree turn to keep all the production in Washington County, and then after the war, there could have been multiple tax jurisdictions, so the accountants didn't like it. How much of that's true, it just depends who you ask. That's a good story, though. But like I say, Roosevelt and Ford had zero use for each other. So that's I have no problem saying that. Another question? Yes, sir.
Part of that story was the airport had gone up with it. The underground had got put in for the runways. So that was another reason why they turned the plant, because they didn't want it intruding into the airfield.
Yep. Ma'am, you had a question?
Yeah, the Rosies, are they still, the group, are they still active?
Got 1, 2 seats down for you right here. They are very active. They practice all the time. They do it, like I said, they are tremendous goodwill ambassadors for the museum. And more importantly, the museum is what commemorate what the women did during the war. To me, we would not have won World War II without the contribution of the women, because there were so many in the plants. And one of the reasons we defeated Germany, Japan, and Italy is we outproduced them. And no women in the plants, that might not be an operative statement.
Do they still have any of the original Rosies?
A few. They were. They received the Congressional Gold Medal last month, March.
March, 2 weeks.
Several weeks ago.
Yeah.
From Congress, and I think 27 original Rosies went down there. But just like the World War II vets, I mean, the time's not on their side.
What about Wendy the welder?
Well, there are different variations of, of word alliteration, but Rosie the Riveter is the one that came through. You had Kay Kaiser's song, Rosie the Riveter, so you didn't have like a Wendy the Welder song, but women did everything. It was not just riveting. Yes, ma'am.
Do you have any indication of the population of dwarfs who worked at the plant?
The number that comes to mind is 8. I think there were 7 guys and 1 woman.
Oh, I thought it was more than that.
But like I say, that was the number that comes to mind. I don't know, but it wasn't a huge number. Anybody else, sir?
Barry, I have a suggestion for your next book.
Okay. I'm listening.
I've often wondered what would have happened if Pontiac and Flint and Lansing had maintained the Pontiac and the Buick and the Oldsmobile. You could write a book about what if that had continued. What would you say was unions, or what turned it away? What was the demise of those 3 wonderful cities and the plants and the workers? All the high school workers could have gone on and on and on and on.
No, a thimble full of auto industry history. It is a long, convoluted saga of what happened with Japanese competition and mechanization and union costs. It's a great topic. I'm sure it's beyond me. I mean, it's a lot. I mean, because like I say, just the impact here in Ypsilanti, when Willow Run Assembly closed and Hydromatic closed, the impact was terrible. Absolutely. The layoffs, property taxes went away, housing values went down, and it was just an economic cataclysm for this area. And I'm sure it's the same in Flint, same in Saginaw, same in Pontiac, you name it.
Lansing.
Lansing, yep.
Thank you.
All good? Yep. Jeff, you got some.
Thank you, Barry. Hey, 2 minutes.
Margaret.
We have great programs like this, first Wednesday of every month. June 5th, we will welcome Mr. Bruce Bigani, who will present his program on the world's most shot-at airlines. It's a story of civil air transport, which is a long way of saying CIA. I'm sure it will be a fascinating program. The attendees who got in tonight's program for free, remember, as a member, you get in for free. We've got boxes off to the side here and just outside the door. They are very hungry for $5 bills. If you would drop a few in there, we can continue to have these great programs every month. Support definitely goes a long way. Again, Becca, thank you for putting these programs together. I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Drive safely on the way home. Remember, if you drive as if your family's in the other car, everybody will get home safely. So again, thanks for coming out. Until next time, bye-bye and bye-bye. See ya.